Hi, it's Craig. There is this knock knock joke that I love, and I think many of you might know it. Certainly, those of you with kids will know the interrupting cow knock knock joke. Knock knock, who's there? Interrupting cow, moo. See? Get it? The cow interrupted the knock knock joke. Anyway, it reminds me a lot of my favorite habit change strategy. I don't even know that you can call it a strategy. It's really a necessity. In order to make long-term positive changes in your lifestyles, you kind of have to incorporate this idea that I call interrupting cue. Now, that's my name for it. Certainly not my original idea. But let me explain. You might remember from my three-brained life video, my friend Danny here, as well as every one of us, has three brains in our head. We've got this neocortex, which is the primate, modern human brain. You've got the mammalian brain here. And deep down, one of the original brains in our bodies, other than the stomach, of course, you've got the lizard or reptile brain. And the reptile brain is where all of our deep patterns, all of our deepest habits live. In fact, the way we respond to the world that has evolved in our lives over many years lives down here, and it likes to keep that control. However, it's a tug of war because that's kind of regardless of how those patterns affect our modern lives. So our neocortex, our primate brain, has to reason, tries to direct new patterns to exist deep down here, but that's not easy. It's hard to take control back from the lizard brain. So something that's a really effective strategy is to interrupt this cycle of cue and response that's happening in our brains before the response actually happens. Let me explain about this in more detail, what's happening in our brain. It's called the cue, response, and reward system. And it is the system that is incorporated in all of our brains that dictates whether we lay down new patterns and habits. We see something, we see a cue, like perhaps we're feeling sad. That's a cue for a behavior, which might be eating some ice cream. The reward is that flood of pleasure, those neurotransmitters into the brain, and of course the mouth feel, the fatty feel and sweet that our tongues and our brains so crave. And that reward is so strong that it's going to make sure, the brain is going to make sure that next time we are sad or frustrated, we're going to reach for that ice cream again, and we're going to reinforce that reward, and that behavior is going to go over and over until we can't even realize it's happening. Now, another example might be how you respond to the world. Perhaps you get angry sometimes. And now anger is, of course, a response to particular cues, but it's also a cue for you to maybe lash out or blame. And that behavior is going to elicit a reward that tells your brain, I am not at fault, or I am in control, and I am protecting myself. Very important. Remember, the lizard brain wants to protect us. So that's an important reward, and it's going to make sure that next time you're angry, you're going to blame or lash out, and you're going to get that same protection feeling and over, and you will never know it's happening. Now, as you can tell from these two examples, by the time the behavior and the reward happen, damage might already be done. You're going to have to wait a while until that cue comes up again in order to try to recognize and stop that behavior, but that could be 10 minutes, could be 10 hours, could be 10 days. Plenty of time for you to lose sight of the behavior that you're trying to change. So interrupting this cycle is critical. Getting in the way between the cue and the response is this interrupting cue concept. So instead of, when you're sad or frustrated, instead of just mindlessly opening up the freezer for some ice cream or whatever that might be, you're going to stop and say to yourself, hey, wait a minute, what am I doing here? Why am I reaching for this? I love in the book, The Hunger Fix, Dr. Pam Peeke, she explains this so nicely. She says, when you go to reach for something to eat, ask yourself, am I hungry? Am I lonely? Am I sad? Am I frustrated? Am I angry? What's the reason? And if hungry isn't in there, close the refrigerator and walk away. And she's just explaining to interrupt this process. Now, that's not so easy, especially like the way we respond to the world. If we're angry, we're going to respond perhaps with blaming. It's really hard to recognize that. But it is why mindfulness is so incredibly valuable, right? The more time you can spend experiencing and being aware of the present moment, the more likely you are to recognize these cues and recognize that that cue is in the process of triggering a behavior that you are trying to change. One of the reasons, again, why mindfulness and why I talk a lot about being mindful or paying attention to what's happening and to the changes you're trying to make. Actually, harder still is making sure that the new behavior that you're trying to install elicits a strong enough and powerful enough reward that makes the lizard brain stand up and take note and request that the next time you experience that cue, you actually do the new behavior, and then that gets that new reward, and so on and so forth. That's actually pretty difficult. You got to make sure, we're going to be talking about this in later videos, what kind of responses might be better, more beneficial, and how to make sure you're eliciting a proper reward that might get the brain to crave a new cycle, more positive lifestyle cycle. So for now, what I'd like you to do is just kind of think about the fact that this exists. And if there's one single person in your life that might benefit from knowing this information, share this with just that one person. Make sure that they get on my mailing list. Make sure you're on the mailing list, of course, so you don't miss any of these lessons. Leave comments and, of course, questions about anything fitness, wellness related. And for now, I just want you to keep in mind, knock, knock. Who's there? Well, until next time.